Impact Skateboard features advanced technology, but from an objective, scientific point of view, how are they? We'll see the shape, weight, pop, durability, slidability, and sound. First, let's take a look at the structure. A skateboard deck is usually not a single wooden plate, but is made of plywood. As wood is essentially composed of fibers, the deck's strength is increased by stacking multiple layers together so that the grain of one layer runs lengthwise, while the grain of the next layer runs crosswise. This itself increases the board's strength dramatically. But Impact Skateboard uses far advanced technology. Take Impact XPU for example. Inside, it has a wooden core, which is made of wood stuck together side by side. Surrounding this is a polyurethane sidewall. On top of it is a carbon fiber layer and a fiberglass layer. Underneath, there is another fiberglass layer, a carbon fiber layer, and finally something called Flow Slick, which is said to make it easier to slide. Let's see what they do in actual skateboarding later. There's another version called XPU Lite, which has the same core structure but uses more fiberglass instead of carbon fiber. You can see the wooden core inside, and as for how it looks, I personally like it better this way. Also, when you hear about decks using advanced technology like this, one brand that naturally comes to mind is Almost Skateboards. Later in this video, I'll explain the differences between these decks, so be sure to stick around until the end. First, let's take a look at the basic shape and weight. Here I have the Impact XPU and an ordinary blank deck. The blank deck is 7 ply, and both are 8.125 x 31 inches. For clarity, the blank deck has a transparent grip tape. They have almost identical noses, and the tail angles are very similar. But you can see that the Impact XPU has a noticeably longer tail. This is just my personal impression, but after 15 years of skateboarding, the tails of the Impact Skateboard feel clearly longer than those of other decks I've used. But it might simply be longer compared to the brands I personally have ridden, so please take this as one opinion. How about the weight? They sometimes say Impact Skateboard decks are heavier, but is that true? Let's actually measure them. The XPU weighs 1.235 kilograms, while the blank deck weighs 1.150 kilograms. So yes, the XPU is about 85 grams heavier, which is roughly the weight of a decent battery. But is that because the XPU has a longer tail? What if they were both the same length? The blank deck is 31 inches and weighs 1.15 kilograms. If we simply scale it up to 32 inches, it becomes 1.186 kilograms. That means XPU would still be about 50 grams heavier, roughly the weight of an egg. I think a difference equivalent to one egg is something that can be compensated for by the skater's technique. The reason the deck feels heavier could be less about its actual weight and more about the shape. The longer tail gives the nose more energy, which may increase the amount of energy you need when flicking out your front foot in your kickflip, for example. I'll make a video on how the deck weight affects performance soon, so please watch it too. Next, let's take a closer look at pop strength. Up until now, many people have already tested their durability in extreme conditions, and it has already been proven that they are difficult to break. But how about something more practical? Within the range of forces that occur in actual skateboarding, how much more pop do the Impact Skateboard decks have? In order to evaluate it objectively, I built a little contraption that can generate a consistent amount of force every time. Basically, the center rod is raised to the height of a stopper so that it gets released from the same height. And the shoe attached to its end pops the tail. This way, the amount of force applied to the tail remains constant every time. A stone was placed near the tip of the rod to stop it from stomping on the tail. Some lines were marked on the ground to ensure that the testing device and the skateboard are placed in exactly the same position every time. In addition, the wheels were tightened as much as possible so that the board won't go anywhere. One major issue in this experiment is measurement error, so we'll try the same condition 30 times and take the average. Please note, sometimes the board hit the central bar. When that happened before the board reached the maximum height, it was excluded from the result. But if that happened after reaching the maximum height, I counted that one. With that established, let's pop the tails. First, the blank deck was tested 30 times. This is the one that's the closest to the average value. On average, it popped to a height of about 9 cm off the ground. And its angle reached 57 degrees at the peak height of the tail. Next, XPU was also tested 30 times. The result was almost identical. It's kinda surprising, no? But as I said, these decks have different tail length. In order to eliminate unnecessary variables as much as possible, let's pop the nose instead. The blank deck averaged 10 cm and 58 degrees, while XPU averaged 10 cm and 59 degrees. From these results, at least when a force is applied instantaneously, there does not seem to be a major difference in how high the boards pop. However, as stated on the official website, the true strength of impact decks is that the pop lasts longer. I've tested XPU Lite and XPU for a month individually. As you know, after riding a regular deck for a month, the tail usually starts wearing down, and the nose often begins to chip. But impact decks have shown astonishing durability. Not only is there no sign of razor tail, but honestly, it still feels almost brand new. I know a deck usually starts to feel softer and more flexible after some time, but so far, after a month or two, it still pops with the exact same feel. And it has also proven its chip prevention ability. Usually, a skateboard deck is made of plywood, and the top layer is especially vulnerable to external force. But when an impact deck hits something, it's always the sidewall, making it virtually impossible to chip. I'm not saying it lasts forever, but so far, nothing I can feel has changed. Being able to keep riding a deck with the same shape and performance for a long time can be a major advantage. It means you can continue practicing under the same conditions without having to adapt to a new deck. Next, let's talk about slide performance. Under certain conditions, this board slides incredibly well thanks to the flow slick layer. If you look closely, you can see tiny bumps and grooves. I'm not exactly sure if it comes from the flow slick layer itself or from the fiber layers below it, but nonetheless, it seems that this texture may hold the secret to why it slides so well. When you slide on a normal wooden deck, its fibers begin to break down on a microscopic level, creating resistance and slowing you down. The flow slick layer behaves differently. Its tiny dents seem to help hold wax, which helps you slide longer. In this case, it gathered wax from the obstacle during the slide. If I scratch the surface, you can see that beneath the wax, the flow slick layer itself remains almost completely undamaged. And all this is possible because the layer is attached to the sidewall, not to a top layer of plywood that might come off. I think the benefits of this board become more noticeable on obstacles that would normally slow you down quickly, especially when plenty of wax is applied. On the other hand, on naturally slippery obstacles such as metal rails, the effect is somewhat more limited. The next one is sound. Let's simply compare the sound of popping the tail. First, the blank deck. It has that crisp, hard sound of a brand new deck. Now XPU. It still sounds solid, but the tone is somewhat heavier. The difference becomes bigger when you drop or roll the board. It almost sounds like a log. This difference is likely caused by the unique internal structure of the deck. It doesn't affect the performance itself, but I suggest keeping this difference in mind before buying it. One more small thing I've noticed is the edge. It has a relatively sharp edge, which doesn't really affect performance, aside from making it easier to cut the grip tape. It just feels funny when you put your feet on the edge, like when you do a tray flip. It's not disturbing or anything, but it's just different from wooden decks. Lastly, let's talk about the differences with almost double impact. As mentioned earlier, the double impact uses carbon fiber discs around the bolts, along with a full carbon fiber top sheet, and is known to be very strong. The problem, however, comes from the fact that while the carbon fiber itself is strong, the structure supporting it is still conventional wood. Because of this, razor tail was inevitable, and the carbon fiber layer had a strong directional structure, which had a tendency to split. After repeated use, the edges of the carbon fiber layer began to break down, making it practically impossible to grab it. In Impact Skateboard, all these problems are addressed through the use of the sidewall. If you look at it from this angle, you can see the carbon fiber layer is protected by the sidewall and is not exposed to the outside. So the carbon fiber doesn't stab into your hands and its performance can last longer. So the introduction of this sidewall basically changed everything while binding everything together. Let's wrap it up. As for the shape, you might need some time to get used to it like you would in any other deck. It is a bit heavier than other decks, but it should still be manageable. While the pop response is standard, its true strength lies in its durability. So far, it's been excellent. It slides really well as it forms a layer of wax, and it sounds kind of unique. In my opinion, being able to ride the same deck for a longer time is a massive benefit, as you don't have to change the way you do things. And obviously, you don't have to buy a new deck. Compared to normal decks, it is a bit pricey, but considering that it lasts longer, it's definitely worth a try. So what do you think? I hope you found something useful. I'll leave a link to Impact Skateboard in the description below, so if you're interested, definitely check it out. And that's all for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.